Hello guys, welcome to the second part of this video. If you haven't watched the first part, I will recommend you go and check that out first. I will provide a link in the description box. The next movie is Rustam. This movie has Akshay Kumar and Ileana D'Cruz in central characters and was released in the year 2016. Now this movie is based on the actual real life case of K.M. Nanavati, which is a very landmark case that students of criminal law study under section 300 when one of the exceptions under section 300 titled grave and sudden provocation is being taught. Now this movie is about how a naval officer by the name of K.M. Nanavati in the real case was accused of committing murders of the lover of his wife Prem Ahuja. Now the interesting thing about this movie is that the naval officer accepts his guilt. However, he tries to exclude himself from being punished for an act of murder under section 302 by stating that he was provoked, he was under grave and sudden provocation by the derogatory remarks that the deceased had passed against his wife, and those remarks had provoked the naval officer so much so that he ended up firing the fatal shots on Prem Ahuja. Now this movie again has three very important aspects that a law student can consider. The first point is about the jury system. Now, it's popularly known that this was the last case. I'm talking about the real case on which this movie is based. This was the last case which was tried as a jury, which was tried by the jury. It was only after this case that the Bombay High Court realized the problems that affects a trial by jury, because it was very easy in those times to sway the jury, to influence them into believing what was right and what was wrong. And it was a result of the justice that was not delivered in this case that the jury system was finally abolished. The Bombay High Court had to step in and gave a decision where the naval officer was convicted. So that's the first issue. This movie tries to focus on the meaning and the scope of this exception of grave and sudden provocation that is found in section 300 of the Indian Penal Code. Secondly, it also shows a very crude and a very early form of how media trial happens and how that has a very great bearing on the decision of the case, on the outcome of the case, because it shows in this movie that since the accused is a naval officer, the public sentiments are with him, including the sentiments of the jury, and the media at that time plays a very important role in that. It's also compounded by the fact that the accused in question is a Parsi person, and the media that is lobbying for him is also essentially being advocated by a Parsi reporter. The third point that this movie focuses on is how easy it is to influence a jury, and how this influencing becomes a problem in leading the case of a decision in becoming a mistrial. The next movie is Talwar. This movie was released in 2015 and stars Irfan, Neeraj Kabi, Tabu and Konkana Sharma in pivotal characters. This movie is based on the real life case that happened in 2008, which was known as the Noida double murder case, where Arushi Talwar and her domestic help Hemraj were found dead in their own house. This movie takes you through the entire journey of right from unfolding of the crime, where the crime is discovered, from the investigation and the callous attitude that the police has while investigating the case, the handing over of the investigation to CDI in this movie, since they didn't want to use the actual name, and finally the matter when it goes as a trial before the court. The movie takes you through the entire process. As a law student, this movie is almost like a gold mine to understand various facets of criminal law, starting with police confessions. Under section 24, as I mentioned previously, section 24 of the Indian Evidence Act, along with article 20 clause 3 put together, stops a police officer from forcing a confession out of a person. One, it's your fundamental right that you cannot be forced to make any self-incriminating statement against you. And secondly, even if you are forced to make one, the Evidence Act dismisses that as not being an admissible evidence. This movie tries to show that when the subordinate officer of Irfan Khan, because he's vying for a promotion, he captures on camera when Irfan Khan is interrogating one of the witnesses, and he puts it on record to show that the statement which became which was helpful in discovering a new track for the investigation. He goes on to show that this was taken out of coercion, this was taken out of force, and since such statements are not admissible before a court of law, the statements were not admitted. Secondly, this movie also tries to show the importance of collection of this forensic evidence on time. This movie it goes on to show the callous attitude that the police had while they were investigating the case in the preliminary stages. So much so, when they were not able to discover the dead body of the domestic help, which was lying on the terrace of the house itself for the next 2 days. Not only, but when they discovered that body, there were certain handprints, blood smeared handprints that were found on the wall. But again, the police, being very casual and very complacent, did not collect that important piece of forensic evidence in time. Later on, it is also shown that when CDI gets into the investigation, they uncover a lot of lacunas in the police investigation, so much so, prompting for the entire dismissal of the police investigation and then restarting the investigation by CDI. And finally, this movie also touches upon the validity of statements that you get from a witness or an accused by using processes like narco-analysis. Now, it's a very, very landmark ruling of the Supreme Court that happened in 2010 in the case of Selvi versus State of Karnataka, where any findings that are based on narco-analysis, polygraph test, or the brain mapping test, any tests which are basically invasive to a person's privacy, were held to be unconstitutional because they violated a person's right under Article 20 Clause 3. And hence, on the very basis, when CDI is able to get permission from the court, you can't get that. First of all, you cannot run the narco analysis or any similar test without the permission of the court. So in this case, after a lot of trouble, when CDI is able to get the permission of the court to carry out this narco analysis, all of that goes into vain because eventually such findings are not admissible in a court of law. Even when the domestic servant actually goes piece by piece in explaining how they committed the offense and the modus operandi, still such highly relevant statements are not considered admissible before the court. The next movie is Pink. This movie was released in 2016 and stars Amitabh Bachchan and Taapsee Pannu in central characters. This movie follows the life of that happens in with three girls when they're out on a party night and they meet these three guys, and what happens after that is what the movie focuses on. This movie shows that these three girls are being tried for an attempt to murder against one of those boys when the character played by Taapsee Pannu hits the guy's head with a glass bottle. What follows through is an intense courtroom drama where the girl's side is being represented by the character played by Amitabh Bachchan, who works as a lawyer. This movie explores the grey area of consent, that is the subject matter in a lot of sexual assault cases, and how this consent is very subjective, but at the same time a very, very, very unique, unequivocal point is what this movie tries to explore. As a law student, this movie helps you in identifying and analyzing a couple of areas in criminal law. First and foremost, unfortunately, there is no provision that objectifies or lays down a proper criteria of how do you decipher consent. Because Section 375 of IPC also defines rape as one of those times when it is being done, when the sexual intercourse is without the consent of the girl, it therefore focuses immense importance on consent. However, there is no explanation nor is there any other provision that corresponds to a person's understanding of what actually this consent is and how do you decipher this consent. This movie empathetically tries to say that a no is a no, and if a girl has said so, even if the girl is a person of questionable character or even if she is a prostitute, you cannot presume that just because she is in a particular profession that expects her to be available to say yes every time. It does not imply that that person does not have that choice. As a law student, it also makes you aware of something called as zero FIR. Now, what is this zero FIR? This was introduced as a recommendation by the J.S. Verma committee after the infamous Nirbhaya incident of 2013. Now, what is this zero FIR basically all about? It simply says that in matters of any offence that has taken place, a woman is allowed to file an FIR in any police station of any territorial jurisdiction, irrespective of where the offence took place. This became a problem in the Nirbhaya incident because there was a constant tussle between the Delhi police and the NCR police when they were trying to shift the case onto one another. So this made the J.S. Verma committee realize the importance of introducing this concept. It even goes on to say that if a police officer fails to register a zero FIR, now this can be done at any time of the day as well, and before any police officer in any police station. And it says that if a police officer fails to register such a zero FIR, then he can be prosecuted under section 166 of CRPC. This movie also, through the courtroom trial as well as some flashbacks, tries to show the victim shaming, the immense victim shaming and victim blaming that goes on against survivors of sexual assault like rape, etc. It goes on to show the society's machoistic, sexist perception about victims of sexual assault and how they try to justify it on some or the other ground, stating that the victim must have done something to have triggered such a reaction from the accused. So this movie very splendidly tries to show that through the depiction of the courtroom trial. And finally, it also, in a very subtle manner, tries to touch upon the point of self-defense. When your own property, when your own body is under a threat of any kind, what lengths can you go to, and can that be allowed or just can be used to justify an act of aggravated assault that you commit against a person, is also what this movie explores. The next movie is Jolly LLB 2. This movie was released in the year 2017 and stars Akshay Kumar, and he carries on the prodigy of Arshad Varsi in the prequel of this movie. It also has Saurabh Shukla recurring in his role as a judge in the case, while the defense lawyer is played by Anu Kapoor. Now, this movie is a tale of how the troubles that a common man has to go through and how he becomes a pawn in this game of power and police between the police and the criminals. This movie shows on how the protagonist tries to challenge a fake encounter that a police officer carries out of a deceased Muslim man and how the family of the deceased is trying to fight for justice. As a law student, there are a couple of points that you can fall back on and analyze. The first and the foremost, which is like the forefront of the movie, is about the legality and the validity of these so-called encounters that police usually carries out. Now, this concept was in news very recently when Vikas Dubey's encounter, the UP police carried out that encounter, and there were all sorts of questions that the media and public were posing on the way and the manner in which that encounter was carried out. Similarly, in this movie also, it tries to engage a conversation, a dialogue about what extent does the police go in the misuse of their powers when they try to carry out a fake encounter and they try to justify it on certain grounds. Now, when you look at the grounds ordinarily, there are provisions in the IPC as well as CRPC which lay down the grounds which justify an act of encounter. For example, we have section 97, section 100, 101 and 102 of the IPC that says that use of force is justified in order to retaliate an attack on your own person. It goes on to be compounded by section 46 of CRPC, which specifically justifies a police officer in the use of force against a criminal when he is when they are pursuing the criminal who is running away from the police. If the grounds or the justifications under these sections are proved, then there is no case that can be made against such a police officer. However, even in the scenario where none of these justifications are proved, the maximum that the police officer will be prosecuted for will be culpable homicide amounting to murder, and he will not be considered to be punished under section 300 for an act of murder. So this is a big problem, this is a big dichotomy, and the law needs to focus on that. The second thing that this movie focuses on, the overworked judiciary, the disdain of the judges that they have, and how it leads to a broken legal system. When we have such high number of pending cases as a part of our in our Indian legal system, it definitely sometimes breaks the spirit of a judge. You may start out as a very zealous and an enthusiastic judge who thinks that they want to change the entire world and they want to bring in a new interpretation of justice, but with passage of time, when you have so much of work, so much of pressure, political work, peer pressure, it does, and the media pressure as well, it does become a problem, and it does affect a judge's quest of carrying out judicial activism. The third thing that this movie focuses on is access to justice of a poor man. It shows in a very, very stark, sad way that if you are a person who's a poor man, who's a person of low means, plus you are a Muslim in a country like India, how big of a trouble will that be, and how easy does it become for the police to brand you as a criminal or as a terrorist and to be able to prosecute you out of any vendetta. There was another movie called Shahid, where Rajkumar Rao plays the titular role, which is based on the real life story of a lawyer called as Shahid, who was gunned down in the court premises because he was defending a couple of people who were being accused of terrorists as per the Indian law. So we unfortunately are privy to the prejudice that the Muslim fraternity suffers from, and this movie tries to focus on how that becomes a problem for the characters in the movie. Sorry guys, this video seems to have gone a little longer than I had expected, so I will be stopping here for today, and I will cover the remaining movies in part 3. So stay tuned for part 3. If you like the content, please hit the like button, share, comment and subscribe to my channel Legal Banter. Thanks for watching.